Welcome to the virtual edition of BMO IFFSA Toronto 2020. And we have today with us Nandita Das, filmmaker, actor, and several other things. And this is a conversation with her titled Listen to Her, which is also the title of a short film that she recently made and released. So I'm going to begin the conversation by asking you about the short film, Nandita. What prompted you to make a short film about domestic violence during the lockdown?
Well, when the lockdown started, I think all of us were just sort of too aghast to even respond immediately and just like kind of coping up with this new reality, and it all just seemed very surreal. I, in fact, normally also work from home a lot. So it wasn't very unusual in the beginning, anyway, I hardly go out. I'm not very social. I do mostly from home. But the only difference was my son was at home and 24/7, so there was no respite in terms of school timing when I usually do more focused work. So the air was cleaner, there was no honking. In a way, it seemed sort of really nice actually in the beginning. And the irony of it, the fact that we were seeing all these images of migrant workers going back home and struggling with it and sort of being caught between the virus and starvation and all these stories we would hear. And I almost was feeling sort of guilty for this privilege of just having a home and being safe in it. And I realized that, one hadn't thought of it as such a huge privilege. And then some of my friends who work on domestic violence, and I was talking to them, and they were telling me these horrific stories. And then there were articles coming out, not just in Indian papers but outside as well, in New York Times and the Guardian. And so it was obviously a global phenomena that with the pandemic, all these other issues were also coming up, the ones that were kind of more hidden otherwise. They were not new issues, but in some ways they had peaked. So I think I just felt very compelled to kind of respond to this dichotomy that I was facing, this contradiction where I was sort of feeling so safe and at home and, sort of almost enjoying the peace of and the calm of nature being in its full form. And then realizing the irony of stay home, stay safe slogan, where so many women were so unsafe and locked down with the perpetrators. And because sitting at home, you can't make a story about a migrant worker anyway, because you're not going out there, and how do you do it? So I just felt that at least I should respond to this. And in films, you can seldom be spontaneous. It just takes so long. You write a script, it requires so many people, it requires funds, and you can never really be impulsive. And I, by nature, I'm very impulsive. So I felt this was one time that I could be sort of literally impulsive through film. So I just literally wrote it one morning, and next 3 mornings I shot it. I mean, in all honesty, I hadn't realized how much the light changes afternoon, after 12 p.m. And so it had to be on 3 mornings. And I had no idea how I was going to shoot it because I just had my phone. I didn't even have a tripod stand or anything. And I'm very fortunate that I have help at home. So my cook, like, I would set it up on books and he would hold it and he would switch on and switch off. And then I thought, oh my God, how do I record the sound? So I had another old phone which I brought out. So I would literally do sound and then I would switch that on and then I would tell him camera, then I would do shot one, take two, or whatever. So it was a bit of a mad shoot. Even the script that I'd written, there was no time really to remember it. All the voices that you hear on the other side, whether it's a husband sitting in the bedroom, or it's a cop on the other side of the phone, or the woman who's being beaten up, or the bell ringing, or the cooker whistling, all of those sounds were not even recorded when I shot it. So I had to kind of imagine them in my head. So it was a different kind of an experience. But again, like all my other work was, directorial work. It really came from this need to respond. And yeah, and that's how Listen to Her was born. And then I knew the UNESCO head of India, so I called him and I said, I'm doing this and I want it to be used for work that is happening on domestic violence. And he brought in a bunch of UN organizations, the UN Women, UNFPA, UNICEF, South Asian Foundation, etc. And they all kind of supported this initiative, and also they are now using it for a lot of their work, both for child rights issues and of course for women's issues. So yeah. that's how it just happened.
Mhm. When I saw the short film, I couldn't help thinking about your play Between the Lines. Because I think it's been a thematic preoccupation in your work. Like you want to show this thing
Yeah,
about how, when we think of domestic violence or gender based issues, we tend to sort of associate them with the working class, but you tend to bring out the
right.
fact that how prevalent it is in amongst people like us and in how insidious ways it manifests itself. So I could see a bit of a
Yeah.
trace of that in the short film as well.
But it wasn't, again, it wasn't conscious. A friend of mine told me, and in fact, my ex, who I acted with in Between the Lines, told me as well. They said, "Oh, there was a little bit of Between the Lines in it." And I said, "Was there?" They said, "Yeah, just the fact that you kind of juxtapose your life with a more working class family, or, a less privileged family, and the kind of violence that happens, and how they both, in a way, help each other to find their own voice." And it was very subconscious, but I think my early years in social work has impacted even my choices in films. In fact, I'm not trained in films, so my whole engagement with films was much later. So I think whatever my journey is, I sort of almost subconsciously connected to issues that also other women face, and these things are across class. We sort of think that we are privileged in many ways, which we are, but then there are some issues that really cut across class and caste or region, and some of these issues are just women's issues, and those are the ways in which we also bond. So and I also kind of wondered, what should I call the film? Because is it Speak Up? Because initially I thought I'll call it Bowl or something, which is the song almost that I end Manto with. So in some sense, for me, there was a continuity about just speaking up. And that's also been my narrative in my other social advocacy work, trying to encourage people to speak up if they are suffering, if they have a problem, to not kind of stay silent. But then I thought, it's not only about speaking up, it's also about listening. Because if there's no one to listen, who do you speak up to? Why would you have the courage to speak up? And here it was really about listening. So that's why I kind of ended up calling it Listen to Her, which is both the women. It is the woman on the other side of the phone, and it is the woman that I play in the film.
Hmm. And you did mention about not being trained in filmmaking. So I was going to come to that. So how was it like running a one woman show where you single-handedly managed all the technical aspects of shooting this film? Did it just make you more
Yeah.
confident in terms of whatever it is that you plan to do next?
Well, I think everything that you do kind of teaches you for the next anyway. Like even when I did Ferrar, as a first film, I think it was kind of ambitious. Had I done it very consciously, I don't think I would have picked up that script for my first film. Again, I was just compelled to tell that story because I just feel that, after 2002 Gujarat riots, I was kind of deeply disturbed, and also violence and fear and prejudice. These, themes have been part of the stories that I want to tell. So in that sense, I hadn't really been trained as a filmmaker. I don't even watch that many films. I didn't assist anyone. So when I did Firak, there was a lot I learned because I was involved in every aspect of the film. And 10 years later, when I did Manto, I didn't do anything in between, but Manto took about 6, 7 years. It was a period film. It was about a subject that I didn't know too much. For those of you who don't know, Manto is based on the life and works of Sadat Hassan Manto, a great short story writer from South Asia. So just doing that film just took the life out of me, and again, I was involved in every department, and in some ways I have learned about filmmaking more from, of course, First Life, because your aesthetics, your visual understanding, your all of that gets also informed by your upbringing. Luckily, my father is a painter and my mother a writer, so I had that exposure. Like if you were a doctor's child, you would know a lot more about medicine than we would. So in that sense, my environment itself informed me about it. My social work experience that I had in my early years, after I did my master's in social work, informed me a lot about people, and how people respond to things, what are they grappling with, what are the struggles that people go through. So in some sense, just life keeps informing you, and being an actor also informs you, although you are privy to a very small part of filmmaking process. People think, oh, you're an actor, you must know everything about films, but you're actually only privy to the shoot, which is a very essential part, but yet it's a very small part. So yeah, working with actors made it easier in the sense that I could relate to what are the actors' needs and how vulnerable sometimes they feel, and how every actor's process is different, having been on that side. But I guess listen to her was a different experience because, like you said, yeah, I was pretty much doing everything, and then doing even long distance post production and giving feedback, or even to other actors. Like I gave them the script, I gave them the dialogues that they had to say, and they would send me the recording, and then I would call them back and I say, nahi, isko thoda aap aise kar sakte ho, aise, things like that, that you also direct even voices. I mean, they are performing in some sense. So yeah, I mean, I don't see it as a very conscious process, but so much of learning just happens subconsciously. And if you're just generally, observant, if you care about what you do, if you listen, if you listen to others also in what they are saying and how they contribute, it yeah, all of that kind of informs you. And thank you for calling this session "Listen to Her." So hopefully you're listening to me, but I better
It's
make
all about
sense.
listening to you. Yes. So just taking off from what you said, so how does being an actor yourself inform your approach to filmmaking in terms of how you deal with other actors, how you understand the very process of acting?
Again, I never wanted to be an actor, so I was a very hesitant actor for a very long time. My first film, Fire, which was directed by Deepa Mehta, at that time she was not the name that she's now. So I hadn't heard of her, I hadn't seen any of her previous films, and nobody else was cast in the film when she met me, and when she cast me. So I was like, oh, this is an interesting story, and she gave me the script, and she said, read it, and then we'll do an audition. And I read it and I really liked it. And I thought, I come from such a liberal family, yet we don't talk about homosexuality. We don't talk about same sex love. And I'm talking about, 24 years ago, when these conversations were not happening in the public space at all. So from then on, I have done now 40 films in 10 different languages. And while many would not, have seen most of my films because they are in different languages, and more people of like Nandita, you might know some of my Bengali films, Shubho Muhurat or Amar Bhuban by Mrinal Sen or Rituparna Ghosh, or I've done Malayalam films with Adur Gopalakrishnan, or other directors in there, or in Tamil I've done some films, or Kannada or Telugu or whatever. So all of those experiences were more instinctive. Also as an actor, maybe because I'm not trained and not so focused on it, there was no method. I'm not a method actor. I go with instinct. It is such a technical medium, unlike being on stage, where the actor, I think, is more empowered to do, and the actor himself or herself becomes the instrument of telling the story. Whereas film is such a director's medium. So as an actor, you could have done your best scene and it would not even make it to the film, or your best take is not the one that's taken. So it's a very different experience. But having acted with various filmmakers, and I'm sure that also has informed me in the choices that I made as a director. But as an actor, I think the way I dealt with different actors, and I'm now going to say also, because this is what the actors have told me, so please don't see me as being immodest, but a lot of the actors were happy in the way I interacted, probably because they also understood that, that I understand what it is to be an actor. Because a lot of the times the directors are unable to explain what they really want. They sometimes go to the psychological sort of analysis of it, which may work for some actors, but definitely not for all. Or they explain, they tell you, now you come to the chair, now you sit down, now you look there. They give you so many instructions that they don't allow you to be yourself and sort of see your interpretation. And in direction, it's such a collaborative thing that it's a fine balance between what the actor brings on set and what you have in mind. And even if you have a clear idea of what you want, you always have to be also open to the actor bringing something new. And at the same time, if the actor is going a bit off track, to bring the actor back. And also every actor has a different process. For instance, in Manto, Nawaz is a very sort of a spontaneous actor, and he doesn't like doing too many takes. Whereas Rasika grows with takes. Rasika Duggal, who plays his wife Safia, she would always say, ek aur take. And she's a fabulous actor. And, I would tell her, no, you were perfect in that. She's like, please. She would literally beg for another take. And Nawaz would kind of walk off the set like, I'm done, this was fine. So they had very different processes. And how do you work with both of them? So one doesn't get sort of stale by doing too many takes, and the other one still has the opportunity to improve. So each actor's personality is also different. You're not just dealing with the actor, you're dealing with the person. So some people like sort of critical feedback because it helps them push their boundaries. Some people completely clam up and get really upset because it hurts their ego, or or they're uncomfortable being told. So every actor has a different process. So I think just being sensitive to that, probably subconsciously again came from my own experience of being on the other side, and also learning from other directors how they directed. Sometimes it's like what not to do is also a learning. So sometimes when directors haven't given proper instructions, that is also something you subconsciously tell yourself that I'm not going to do that.
I just remembered I visited the set of Manto, I think for one day, one evening, and I remember the scene where
Mm,
Nawaz
yeah,
Nawaz's Manto was boiling milk. And I don't
yeah,
think that
you were
shot
in the
even made it to
house.
the film
Yeah,
finally, but I remember how many
no, it
takes,
didn't.
how many
I
takes
know
we
it
asked for.
didn't.
And Nawaz was visibly very flustered about how much of a perfectionist he thought you were. And I think at
Yeah,
some point he
yeah,
mentioned
like
to me,
everyone thinks. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
at some point he said that, the thing with Nandita is कि अगर एक letter पढ़ रहे हैं, तो she would want exactly what is being read, even if you don't see the letter, even if the audience doesn't see the letter. She wants exactly
He's
what
just
is
being
written
mean
to
to
be read.
me.
So yeah, he
No,
was a
Nawaz
bit
was sometimes quite bugged with me, because what would happen sometimes, he would like even when you do acting, you sometimes change the words to make them your own. Because everybody speaks differently. So I would, even as an actor, I have done that. But when you're playing a role of a great writer, there's something in the words that you can't just mix around. You can't just use a lesser word, or so because in some sense you had to. So sometimes he would say, जरूरी है यही बोलना, मैं अगर ऐसे बोल दूं तो ऐसे, अरे ये उनका बहुत ही मशहूर कोट है, ऐसे नहीं बोल सकते हो. So we would have some of those things. And जिसको कहते हैं business, in acting we call something that's called business. कि business क्या है? That means when I'm saying my lines, I'm not just standing there and saying, but I'm picking something and then I'm taking this, and that has a rhythm. If you go off rhythm with it, then it just seems, it doesn't work. You can't pinpoint it. As an audience, you may not be able to tell exactly what it is, but you can feel it. So in some of those things I would nitpick. So generally my cast and crew thought that I was a perfectionist and I'm very finicky, and I throughout thought that I was compromising and I was completely not doing what I wanted to do. So that unfortunately has been the narrative of my life, because that is very relative, you see. What is being finicky and perfectionist is a very relative thing. No, but largely I think we thoroughly enjoyed working with each other. And sometimes actors don't like it in the moment, but later they come and tell you that, thank God you told me to do that. And I mean, because they want to also, it's also a lot of pressure. There are about 100 people watching you perform. And especially if you become a big actor or whatever, it's not easy for anyone, even if it's your director telling you about small things that sometimes you almost feel like, oh, I should have thought of that. So that kind of a creative tension is sometimes there between actor and director. But at the
no,
end
no,
of the
I
day,
don't
we were
doubt that
always
he
laughing.
appreciates you
And
as a director very much. But
well,
also,
yeah,
want
no,
to
I
ask,
also appreciate him as an actor very much. So it's mutual.
so, after having made two films, how do you deal with that sort of, how do you feel, in fact, about that sort of a perfectionist attitude? Do your films, when you see them, do they disappoint you? Do they feel like you have achieved what you set out to achieve? And this is also keeping in mind the fact that your films are very ambitious in terms of also their politics. So that's
Too
definitely
much. You're
something very
trying to achieve too
challenging,
much.
a very challenging terrain that you are treading. So,
Yeah, because I've never really selected stories. I mean, they've just spoken to me, like they've sort of caught me by the throat and said, do this film. And I've just sort of felt very compelled. So I haven't really thought of the challenges in the beginning, and they slowly manifest. So I take a lot of time to write, and then during the shoot is my least favorite part of the filmmaking process, because there are just too many factors. I'm constantly going mad, and as a director, you're constantly making decisions about everything, and also I was wearing a producer hat, because I also produced the film. We had three other producers, but they were largely investors who kind of, and of course supporters in marketing and all of that. But in on the day of the shoot, I was really producing it. We had a team of executive producer and others who were doing it. But to keep it in the budget, when you have to wear those two hats, we have to keep it in the budget and yet want to do what you really want to do. So for instance, we had a 45-day schedule, and we didn't have enough money, and we had to bring it down to 42, which is already very tight. So how do you we found sometimes two locations, one of Bombay and one of Lahore, in the same garden. Or we found three locations in Pune, which were all sort of at various different times in the film, and you can't make out, but they are literally 100 meters away. So though, like, I spent a lot of time trying to find locations, and so that art direction, we don't have to do too much, because I'm always apprehensive of art direction, whether it's going to be as real as I want it, because realism is a subjective thing, and most people get trained in more mainstream cinema. So what is real for them or authentic for them isn't for me. So that's why I found really interesting locations where even the switchboards were right and all of that. So finally, for me, editing is really the most exciting part. So after the shoot, I thought I had got about 30% of what I really wanted. And it's through the editing process where the film starts emerging. And we had to do long distance editing, because my editor was in Chennai. And I had also worked with him in Firak, Shrikar Prasad, one of the most eminent editors. But in Manto, it was really difficult, because I couldn't go to Chennai as many times, unlike in Firak when I didn't have a child. So that posed new problems. But definitely post production is for me the most interesting part. And from 30%, it starts rising with editing, with sound, with music, and all of that. And by the end of it, I would say it was sort of 65-70% of what I really set out to do. But I feel like any director would feel that way. In a creative process, you can never feel that you've really achieved what you want. And that all changes. Like after seeing it on the day of the premiere in Cannes, after that, I've not seen Manto even once. I wouldn't be able to see it, because I know I'll only find faults with it. But even now, because it's on Netflix, people watch it, and every second day somebody still calls me up, either a friend or somebody on social media, and that they've watched it, and this is how they felt moved, or what they thought about it, etc. So film is a medium where, even though I'm such a journey person, and all my life I took pride in the fact that I'm not so wedded to the outcome, but cinema is something nobody really cares about your backstory. Finally, it's the film that matters, and you have to be invested in how the outcome is going to come. So it's kind of almost counterintuitive for me, but I'm slowly coming to terms with it.
So is that the most rewarding part when you hear back from audiences about how your film has managed to affect them or move them?
Yeah, because in some ways you are telling a story. It's a medium of communication. It's not a personal art where I make a painting or I write a poem, and it's at least I've been able to express. I'm not so indulgent. It takes too much time, too many people, and a lot of money to be able to make a film. It's a real privilege, and you don't want to waste that opportunity. And it's because you want to share. I mean, for me, I made Manto because I wanted to respond to everything that was happening today. And I felt that if I did a film about today and today's violence and prejudice and fears and the kind of, you know, identity and divisive politics that's being played out, I wouldn't be able to do it, because it would polarize the audience, and some would have their shutters down and wouldn't even hear the story. Even Firak, which was more sort of topical, it was difficult because I mean, even in Firak, I haven't really done any name calling or blame game. It's again very personal stories, because you want to communicate. You don't want people to have their shutters down. So in that sense, for me, art is a medium of expression. It's a medium of communication. It's a medium of social change. So in some sense, I think, yeah, it is important what people feel, and it doesn't mean good or bad. You could dislike it, but what are your reasons to? Is it troubling you? Is it disturbing you enough? Do you have a certain sense of thinking about human beings and their relationship, and is it challenging you? The good thing is people have always responded with something more than I liked it and I didn't like it. They've shared their stories. They've told me how it has impacted them emotionally in the way they think about these things. So that definitely is gratifying.
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, because with both your films, whether be it Firak, which is about the Gujarat riots, or be it Manto, which, as you said, is actually a response in so many ways to the current socio-political climate. So you
Many
definitely
words
want,
said during the partition.
yeah, you definitely want people to engage with them in a more meaningful way.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings me to the next question, which is that you have always been someone whose filmmaking, acting, and activism, if I may call it that, has always been inseparable from each other. And all of these areas, I
Absolutely.
think, come with their own baggages, their own responsibilities, tremendous
Yeah.
responsibilities. And how has that been for you over all these years?
Well, you're absolutely right, Anita. At least you're saying that they are inseparable. Most people assume that they are these very different streams of work, and but they are actually deeply intertwined. They feed on each other. I've learned something in one that has impacted my work in the other. Also, working in films, if you see all my work, even as an actor, largely has been about wanting to communicate something that you deeply care for or you're troubled with. So, to answer, oh sorry, what was your last bit of the question? I missed
No, I
that.
mean, this
You
process
had
and all the
how there was
aspects that are so involved in
the
are very
responsibility.
intertwined. Does that make it all the more challenging and hard, or is it a rewarding process in and of itself?
Yeah. Well, it is both. Like, to be honest, when I started, I did fire, and then suddenly I was doing absolutely ground level social work, which we call social work. So I was working in the slums of Delhi and working with adolescent girls, and then I was working with uh, training rural teachers, and so it was very much ground level work. And then I did fire, and after that, suddenly there was this spate of invitations to talk at various places, because suddenly you become a film person. People want to interview you, people want to call you. And I used to think, my God, when I did sort of deeper work, nobody wanted to hear me. And now, because I've just done this film, everyone wants to talk to me. So there was a certain superficiality of it all that used to sort of almost anger me and trouble me. And then over the years, I felt like, okay, I need to make peace with it. And this is not so much activism, because I wasn't really doing that much on groundwork that many other activist friends, and I have greatest regards for them. So I always stay away from the word of activism, because I don't think I do that. But then this whole word, thankfully, it has a word which is so advocacy, because otherwise I don't know how to kind of explain it, that you're just, what I'm doing is just talking about things I care for. I would anyway do it. And then my films allow me to do that more, because then you are called for various forums to talk about different issues. The unfortunate thing was that I didn't have any one pet issue. So I was kind of dragged onto many different issues. And I also saw the how they impact each other. So I cared about many different issues. What I have really struggled with is that the film people think of me as an activist, and the activist world thinks of me as a film person. So I kind of don't fit in anywhere, which also I would have been fine with. But the thing is that largely all my work is all pro bono, because everything that interests me, and a lot of it is social advocacy, is things that anyway I would be happy to share and hear and talk about and debate and all of that. But all of that obviously doesn't pay you. So the film people, they want you to do more of, when they have to do an advertisement which is going to sell a product which is environment friendly, where it's about something which has a social connotation. But if you can see through it and you feel like, no, no, this is very actually commercial, this is just a false garb, then you kind of stay away from it. Or a film. So what I've really struggled with is, how do you strike a balance that you can live a sustained life? Because I really don't live a film person's life. Because if I was a pure film person, then I would have had this nice little wall around me where people can't reach me, that I would be a little more inaccessible, and it would be fine. It would be accepted being inaccessible. But I'm extremely accessible, and I've also known lots of people, because I do a lot of talks and I interact with various people. I speak at various educational institutions, etc. So in some sense, I'm very accessible, and by choice, and that. But then how do you keep that balance between keeping your own sanity and saying that, I also need to write, I need some space? And that's something I've been struggling even in the lockdown period. I've done so many webinars and conversations on various things, from parenting to migrant workers to domestic violence to issues on identity and prejudice. I mean, name it, and I've kind of done those talks. And sometimes I feel a bit sapped and sort of, also it's not healthy to be talking about yourself and your perspective. I mean, who cares beyond a point? And sometimes you have the same answers because the questions are the same. Kind of grapple with. So I'm hoping to take at least a month or two off and just sit and write, because I don't know what I'm going to do next.
Wow, I mean that's just very um
Sorry for my long answers, but
no,
they're
no,
all
no.
kind
I'm
of
just trying to like process everything
intertwined.
that you have said because there's literally so much to think about there. Because on the one hand, it is your celebrity status in a way that affords you like this visibility, so you can talk about these social issues, and you know that people are out there listening. At the same time, I can imagine how draining it must be to have to talk about almost each and everything on a daily basis. So,
Yeah, and also this whole celebrity, we are very celebrity driven. Like even on some of the issues, I know people who can talk much better, who have, far more knowledge about it, and they have ground level experiences that they could share. And, we're just caught in this whole celebrity thing. So I'm also constantly trying to break that and also enter spaces where it's not only about being sort of a public person, and just trying to figure that out. And when I wrote a book, I don't know if you've heard of that, but I did a book called Manto and I, which was about my Manto journey. And it's basically about the whole journey, right from the inception of the idea to taking it on campuses in the US. I took it to 8 campuses like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Columbia, etc. So, and the release and the art direction and what it is to be a mother while making. So every aspect of that journey kind of is in that book. And I realized what I really liked was of not interacting with too many people. Like when you can just sit and write and not have to talk and not have to be part of that thing, because not every organization or every when they invite you, it's not because only they really care about what you think and what you feel. It's often sometimes quite superficial still. It's only because you're going to get a few more eyeballs than probably they can get. And you're somewhere in the hierarchy. Somebody who can get more eyeballs will come and you'll be completely thrown out. So there is no reason for anyone to take themselves too seriously. So that's something I definitely don't do. I just, kind of, just playing my part. I use those opportunities to talk about things that I care for and hope that others will care for it too.
no, that's wonderful of you to, I think, be so honest and reflective about all these things. I'm going to ask you about actually the intersection of motherhood and filmmaking. I'm sure you get asked that a lot because I think it's important to talk about because not many women filmmakers.
What's the intersection between filmmaking and,
Motherhood and
sorry, I missed that
filmmaking?
one. Motherhood.
Because I mean, for one,
Yeah,
there are
we
so
women get asked.
yeah, and I don't think it's talked about the way in which at least I would like it seen talked about. So,
Absolutely, you're right.
how do you think the two, I mean, influence or affect each other? Is there a symbiotic relationship? Does being a mother change the way you look at filmmaking and vice versa? How has it been for you, the experience?
Well, I think filmmaking gets impacted by everything, all your life experiences. Being a mother is one of the many experiences, right? So, with school you study, what kind of childhood you had, what kind of friends you have, what you've been exposed to, where all you've gone to the world, what books you've read, what films, all of that impacts. But the way I think motherhood really, I mean, in the context that I would also want to share is, firstly, men never get asked this question. Even fathers don't ever get this question. It's because they are able to compartmentalize. And of course, I'm generalizing, but largely when they're working, and when they're, sort of at home and doing their fun things with the child, it's that. But the mother, largely, I would again say that women carry that worry constantly or carry that responsibility and always feel that this is my primary role of being the mother, and everything else has to fit in. because you can be the only mother to that child, whereas somebody else can still make a film. So you're constantly having to balance. And I think growing up in a patriarchal kind of a society, how much ever, I mean, I've been doing gender work for the last 30 years, like literally from my probably even before my master's in social work. When I was doing street theater with Safdar Hashmi, we would do these plays on women, etc. So I think from at least since I was 17, I've been doing. And yet I realized when I became a mother that I was also caught by this emotion of guilt. When I would work more, than I would feel guilty that I wasn't giving enough attention to my child. When I was giving attention to my child, I would think, my God, my work is suffering. I need to balance. And it's good for children to watch their mothers work. I'm a firm believer of that. My father, who's a painter, he had a studio at home when we were growing up. And I used to really think that, and my mother used to work, and used to do a 9 to 5 job. So I would think mothers go to work and fathers cook and clean and polish and paint. So I had this role reversal very early on, and thank God for that. But otherwise you get stuck in those roles. You see fathers working and in a focused way, and mothers always sort of going all over the place and worrying and telling you to eat and doing this and that. So in that sense, filmmaking is such an absorbing process that nobody really wants to ask you what it is to be a full-time hands-on mother and to be doing the film. And if you talk about it, it's almost like, oh God, now listen, you're not the first person to be a mother. There have been others, they've worked. What's the big deal? Like, you've got to balance. Women are good at multitasking. That's not a compliment you want, actually, because why do we want to multitask constantly? We want to be focusing on one thing at a time, like most men do. So in that sense, it is something that is actually very deeply tied in. And I can see my own involvement in Firak and Manto have been so different. Like in Firak, I think I was so much more focused. I was much more wedded also to the outcome. If something didn't go right, it would deeply, deeply bother me. Whereas in Manto, I think what motherhood has taught me, that in the larger scheme of things, it's okay. It's okay to let go. It doesn't matter. There are bigger problems to deal with. So you become less anal about every small thing. You also know that you have to have a greater work life balance, which otherwise when you're making a film, that is it. You don't think of anything else, and it's seen as a great quality, that you're so passionate that you don't care about anything else. And we have so many stories of men even letting people be, sort of that Dr. Zhivago's story or something, where this woman's leg was caught between the railway platform and the train, and somebody told him that we'll have to stop the shot, and he said, let it go on or something. I mean, there are many such stories where people have done so much, have let go so much for the sake of cinema, this great cinema. And I think while I love making films, I think also as women, I think we are more human. I don't think we let go of so much of the human side for this great art. And with due respect to art, I think human beings and our different roles are just as important. So in Manto, I found myself, while being a perfectionist, much more sort of balanced in that sense. And constantly I'm reminded of that, okay, it's at the end of the day, it's just a film. It's not the best film. It's not the worst film. I'm going to give it my best. And everybody's giving their best. And you're also less hard on others because you're less hard on yourself. If something doesn't go right, you say it's okay. You focus much more on solutions. And just the conversations with your child make you grow and make you see things in a different light. I think you just become a much more internal person. And the more internal you are, I think, uh, even in your films, you can have more layers. You can tell stories that are also more internal. Like in some ways, in Manto, it's about knowing him, the person, not just the writer. And the way I've shot it also, like Bombay, you see much more of Bombay. You see the city. The external context is important. But as you go closer and as you go to Lahore, it's really more about him and how he's feeling and how he's thinking, and the outside kind of goes away. So I'm sure like every other experience, I'm sure motherhood has more maybe than other experiences, because it's something you're sort of at it. And now it's my 10th year of motherhood. So there's lots that I've learned from my own child and from this experience. And even in the lockdown, I mean, it's been the 4th month we've been in lockdown, and my son and I, we've hardly stepped out. And how do you keep a child away from gadgets? How do you talk to him about everything happening in the world? How do you raise a son to be sensitive, to be having a sense of equality, being sensitive? So yeah, so there's so much else to learn from. And I think, and cinema is only as good as your learnings from life. If you're not going to do that, what's the point of making film? So I'm not, in that sense, I'm not a very ambitious filmmaker. That I want to tell the stories in the way I want to tell. I want to take my time, and I want to live, live fully before I tell other stories.
No, and that empathetic, unique female gaze does come across in, I think, both Firak and Manto. And just to give some context into why I wanted to talk about motherhood at length, because I think my biggest takeaway from writing a book about women filmmakers was that women simply don't have the luxury to compartmentalize their different roles. So
Yeah,
they're mothers, they're filmmakers,
absolutely.
they're taking care of their houses and the people around them in caregiving roles. And
Yes.
I think it's very
Your
important to
parents, you're worrying about your parents as much, your friends. Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
that's the person you are.
And it's very important to normalize this idea so that, aspiring filmmakers out there know that, okay, it's possible to do these all at the same time while it's really challenging. So, not to valorize it in a way, but normalize
Not to
it.
valorize it, exactly, normalize it, but also to bring in sensitivity of the film industry. It's not really conducive to be doing that, right? You're supposed to not talk about those things. That's not supposed to be an impediment. And that's why there are fewer filmmakers now. Probably more will come, because now there are many more women who are kind of challenging those norms. Many women are opting to not have children, in fact, because they feel like, oh my god, I don't want to be dealing with that, because this is so demanding and this is so absorbing. And I'm not making a value judgment of whether to have a child or not. It's a completely personal choice. I know many people have chosen not to and are just as happy, if not more, I guess, but it's not a value judgment. But the industry itself, the film world, because it's been largely male dominated, it's really not taken this into account. So,
Mhm.
for instance, when I started shooting, my first day of my shoot was the first day of my son's spring break. And I didn't want to leave him behind. And, he would sort of, what would he do sitting in a house? And, all the children are going to go to their for summer holidays and travel, etc. So I brought him with him to Gujarat, and I remember it was the refugee camp shoot with Gurdas Maan and 250 other villagers who were doubling up as junior artists who had never faced the camera. And it was 45 degrees heat. We were all with this malma, like a little cloth tied around us, because it was so dusty, and my child was sort of tugging at me at the waist. And I shot it, and the whole crew was staying in a small town about an hour from the village where we were shooting. And I thought, my god, if I'm an hour away and he wakes up late, or I have a night shoot, how am I going to go back and forth? So I stayed in a house in this village called Vaso. I literally walked into various houses and I said, "Can I stay in your place?" And there was one house where the family was in Ahmedabad, and it was an empty house. It didn't have an air condition, and but it was an old house, so they were made so beautifully that it's not as hot as the regular houses are. So I literally would put my son to bed and then go out and shoot. He could walk into the set whenever he woke up, or I would do a night shoot and I would just come in the morning. As he's waking up, I would fall asleep. So I could do all of that. So as a mother and a filmmaker, you're thinking of all of that as you're thinking of your shots and your art department, and you're kind of almost simultaneously thinking of everything. You're editing, you're doing sound, and you get a call that another parent who was to pick up cannot pick up, and you're doing a play date. And it's like, sometimes it's crazy, and you think that, do men ever realize, does the film world ever realize what we as mothers go through when we make a film? You just watch the film and you have no idea what the stories are behind that. And I've written some of that in the book as well. So for me, writing Manto and I in that sense was quite cathartic.
Mhm. And if it were up to me, I would say that men should be asked these questions because, I mean, that
I
might
know.
encourage them to take on more active roles in parenting and caregiving.
That might
But
actually make them think, oh yes, I'm also a father. Like
also a
maybe
father.
maybe it is supposed to interfere with my filmmaking process.
Yeah. So I don't think that the solution is to not ask women these questions, but I think ask them more to
Absolutely.
increasingly to men so that, we normalize that people have different roles in their lives.
No, and also it's important to us because that's how we also are able to tell our stories for others to be sensitive and to understand what women as mothers also go through when they're making films and how they need to be supported or to be cognizant of just their juggling act that they have to do. So I think these stories do need to come out.
Absolutely. So just to sort of sum it all together, what do you think is the female gaze? What does it mean to you? How do you see it manifesting in your own films?
I think the fact that I'm a woman itself is a theme. Like whatever I may do, it is going to impact me. You know, when I direct, I'm not constantly thinking I'm a woman. I'm just directing as a director. But my life experiences as a woman must impact the choices I'm making. For instance, when we had the screening in Cannes, there was somebody, a French woman, walked out and she was all teary eyed and she said, I have seen Firak and I have seen Manto, and I knew these two had to be a woman director. And I said, that's because you know it already. She said, no, the fact that both the films are about violence and you've not shown any violence in the film. Both the subjects are such that if a man had made, there was enough justification to make them violent. And I hadn't thought of it like that because I hadn't consciously not shown violence, or maybe in some ways yes, because I myself don't like seeing violence. So it had automatically, that didn't feature in. Or if you see the way women characters are portrayed, both the films are not really women centric films, which sometimes is a criticism of me. There are people who've said, some women friends have said, oh, you sort of champion women causes, and why didn't you make a film that was women centric? Why did you choose to tell a story of a male protagonist, in Manto, for instance? And I feel even men who have been so sensitive to women as Manto was in his writings, in his own life, I think we have to celebrate those stories as well. And for me, female gaze is not about only having a woman protagonist, but every female character and every even male character. Because after all the narratives have been controlled of men and women by men till now, largely. So when we tell a story, then we are controlling that narrative. We are saying, this is how I see a woman who's led, who's not all good or bad, or this is how my male protagonist, who I so love, who I revere so much, but there are times where his wife needs a more empathetic gaze than even him. That it's okay to show my protagonist as a faulty man who has many contradictions. And I think all of that is part of that female gaze. But having said that, I think men can also have that female gaze. I mean, there are so many films that we have seen about women are actually made by men, because at that time there were hardly any women filmmakers. So whether it is, Satyajit Ray, whether it's Ritik Ghatak, whether it's, Shyam Benegal, whether it's Adur Gopalakrishnan, Rituparna Ghosh, all of these filmmakers had told us stories about women. But the reason we want a female gaze is because we also want diversity. There is an experience as a woman that I have, which is unique to me as a woman. And that story must also be told. So I feel there's more of that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nandita. I think it was a very, very thought-provoking conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope the audiences will too.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Sorry if the answers were long and long winding, but
No, no, no. I
some
think
of
I
these
was
things
very
I actually feel about, and also they are also connected. That it's difficult to uh, keep them too concise and make them into sound bites.
No, I think it was definitely, it gave me a lot to think about. So thank you for that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Nandita, and thank you all.
Thank you.